Hello and welcome to Basics for Gamers presents Part 2 of the Basics of Death in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. In the last video, we discussed the basic process for determining when a character dies, and in this video we're going to expand on that with a number of topics, starting with ongoing effects. One of the biggest questions about death in Pathfinder is what happens to all of my conditions and other effects when I get knocked unconscious. For example, if I'm a wizard and have spells active, do they remain active while I'm knocked out and making recovery checks? Once a spell is cast, it lasts until its listed duration ends. Let's look at Wall of Fire. We see here it has a duration of 1 minute. So if you cast Wall of Fire and then get reduced to 0 hit points, or even if you die, then that death will have no effect on the wall. It will persist until 1 minute has passed from the moment that you cast it. But on the other hand, let's say you cast Protector Sphere and then get knocked unconscious. Does that mean the sphere goes away and your allies lose their damage resistance? Well, if we look at its duration, we see it says sustained up to 1 minute. Sustained means the spell ends at the end of your next turn unless you use an action to sustain it for another round. In the case of Protector Sphere, it can be sustained up to 1 minute. So we'll say you cast the sphere and then get reduced to 0 hit points and knocked unconscious. The sphere does not go away immediately, and instead it continues to operate until the end of your next turn, which should be a full round because when you're knocked unconscious, your place in initiative is moved to immediately before the turn in which you were reduced to 0 hit points. If someone heals you before then, so you have hit points and are conscious, you can sustain the spell on your next turn just like normal. But if your next turn comes around and you're still unconscious, then the sphere will go away and everyone will lose their DR at the end of that turn. That's what happens to spell effects when you're knocked out, but what about afflictions? Well, if you're suffering damage every round from a poison and fall unconscious, bad news, but that poison is going to continue damaging you every round until you succeed on your saving throws or its maximum duration passes. And damage totals don't matter while you're unconscious and dying, so this would just increase the value of your dying condition like normal. And the same is true for persistent damage and other conditions like being paralyzed. Being knocked unconscious has no effect and they all continue as normal. In the previous video, we discussed the dying condition, and the unfortunate result of reaching dying 4 is your death. Dying 4 is the default dying threshold, but there are a couple ways to adjust that. First is through the doomed condition. When a character is suffering from the doomed condition, their dying threshold is lowered by the value of the doomed condition. So if you get struck by a Grim Reaper Scythe, you gain Doomed 1. This means you will die at dying 3 instead of dying 4. If you get hit again, your doomed value increases to Doomed 2, which in turn means you'll die at dying 2. If your dying threshold is ever reduced to dying 0, then you instantly die, even if you have full hit points. Fortunately, there is a way to move the dying threshold in the other direction too, and that's with the Diehard feat. This is available to everyone at first level and raises the dying threshold so that you die at dying 5 instead of dying 4. It's also possible to be killed in one hit without even dealing with the dying condition at all. For example, if you suffer massive damage. When you suffer twice your maximum hit point value in one hit, you instantly die. So if you're a first level character with 16 hit points, and an enemy deals 32 points of damage in a single attack, then you die instantly. Heroic Recovery is one more option to save you from death. If you have at least one hero point, you can spend all of your hero points to stabilize. When you do so, you lose the dying condition and remain at 0 hit points, but you do not have to make recovery checks. Also, when recovering this way, you do not increase your wounded value by 1. This is a very rare exception to the rule that states your wounded value increases by 1 whenever you lose the dying condition. This can be done at the start of your turn or whenever your dying condition would increase. Normally, this is a last resort when you're at dying 3 and fail the recovery check at the start of your turn. And not directly tied to death and dying, but I thought this might be a good time to talk about non-lethal attacks. Most weapons are designed to kill, but some are intended to incapacitate their enemies without killing them. These weapons are noted with the non-lethal trait and include fists, saps, whips, and blowguns. Damage inflicted by a non-lethal weapon lowers their target's hit points just like being hit with any other weapon, but if an attack from such a weapon reduces the target to 0 hit points, that target falls unconscious but does not gain the dying condition. And other weapons can also be used to incapacitate an enemy by taking a -2 circumstance penalty to their attack rolls. So, for example, a fighter wielding a longsword wishes to knock out a bandit so that they can question them later. That fighter would try and strike the bandit in the head with the pommel of their sword instead of stabbing them with the blade. Their attack roll would suffer a -2 penalty, but if successful, would deal its normal damage, and if that damage is enough to reduce the bandit to 0 hit points, they would fall unconscious instead of being killed. In this video, we discussed a few of the miscellaneous rules surrounding death in Pathfinder. First, when you fall unconscious, any magical effects, poisons, curses, or other ongoing effects or conditions do not instantly go away. Instead, they progress as normal. Effects caused by magical spells will persist until their duration passes. In the case of sustained spells, they will persist until the end of the unconscious character's next turn. If they regain consciousness before then, they can spend an action to sustain the spell and keep it going as usual. The default dying threshold is dying 4, meaning that when the value of your dying condition reaches 4, you die. But there are a few ways to adjust this threshold, including the doomed condition, which lowers the dying threshold by the value of doomed, and the dying threshold can be increased to 5 by taking the Diehard feat. A character instantly dies if they suffer massive damage. Massive damage occurs when a target suffers damage that is at least twice their maximum hit point total. Characters with the dying condition can avoid death by using heroic recovery. They must have at least 1 hero point to do so, and this costs all of the hero points they have, but they will stabilize, meaning they remain at 0 hit points but lose the dying condition. Also, characters do not increase their wounded value by 1 when losing the dying condition by using heroic recovery. And last, non-lethal attacks. Attacks made with weapons that have the non-lethal trait function like any other weapon, except when they reduce a target to 0 hit points, that target falls unconscious but does not gain the dying condition. And non-lethal attacks can be made by any weapon that does not have the non-lethal trait by suffering a -2 penalty to their attack rolls. Before we close, I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our patrons. These videos would not be possible without their continued generosity and support. Members of the Basics for Gamers Patreon community receive special benefits, like getting to vote on the topics that we cover in the future, and also they get to see these videos 1 week and ad-free before everybody else. Visit the link shown on the left of the screen and in the description if you'd like to know more about becoming a patron. If you would like to support this channel and help it grow, the easiest way to do that is by subscribing and clicking the bell icon so you get notified when new videos release. And we can always be reached through our Twitter and Facebook pages too. Thanks for watching, take care, and we will see you soon with more Basics of Pathfinder.